Hello everyone, hi Izzie, welcome back to Faith for Dummies. How are you doing?
Hi Rob, hi everyone else. Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you. Well, I'm very tired. We've had a lot of illness in the house this week, but otherwise I'm fine. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Oh, well, I'm not bad. I suppose I'm just average good, you know. When people say you just default to good. I'm constantly tired, but there we go. Yeah.
Life of a parent.
Yeah, true. I believe, because this is the part normally where we would do a dummy moment, isn't it? That our guest on the interview has a dummy moment for us.
She does. She has a great dummy moment, and I was there for it and her retelling of it the next morning, and it was hilarious. So we'll leave that bit to her.
Yeah, okay, cool. I have heard it. It is good. I don't think we have anything else to say, really, do we? Other than getting straight into it.
No. The one thing I will say before this interview is that, like with the interview we did about depression, this interview is about anxiety, and we mention medication and things like that and therapy and whatever. We just want to make it really clear that we're very much an advocate of medication if that's something that you need. So please don't get confused or think that, we're saying anything against it. If your mental health issues need medication and advice from a doctor, then we are all for that. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been on medication myself, so I completely agree.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, let's hand over to Izzie and Jamie.
Great. Hey, Jamie, welcome to Faith for Dummies. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you very much. So we know each other from back when I lived in Leicester. I think we've known each other for 7 years, something like that, maybe 8. I'm not sure.
I've completely lost track, if I'm honest.
I measure it by how old your child is. So she's 10. So I think that's how long we've known each other. But we wanted to get you on the podcast to talk about the topic of anxiety. I am sure, because you're here, you don't mind me saying that you have struggled and do live with anxious feelings, anxiety, and everything that kind of surrounds that. And we also had your husband on to talk about depression. So you're a wonderful couple.
We are the perfect pair.
But you both have a lot of wisdom and advice, and you both love Jesus. So we want to talk about that with you today. But first things first, we have to ask you for your dummy moment. So you had a dummy moment at my hen do recently, and I would really love if you would share that, please.
Yes, it wasn't my greatest moment. So you and I had stayed up till silly o'clock, and I was sharing a room with your other friend who was feeling quite sick because she's pregnant, and she'd gone to bed early because she's feeling quite tired. And she had very graciously left a tiny little glowing lamp on so that I didn't have to stumble around in the dark. And I accidentally fell into the room, so smashed the door open. And then I turned the big light on, and that kind of made her have a lightning moment. And then also there was a lamp in between our two beds that was the most sensitive touch lamp. And so every time I grazed by it, it kept on turning on. So she had been very, very nice to me and said, "Oh, don't worry. It's fine. And by the end, she was like, "I feel like I'm in a lightning storm, and all you are doing is flashing a light in my face at 2 a.m. And I was like, I'm so sorry. And it was almost like every time I tried to be quiet, I made a noise. And every time I tried to not put the light on, I accidentally flooded the room with light. So, yeah, that was really fun. Thanks for bringing it up.
It was brilliant hearing that in the morning, and Jamie retold it very theatrically. And I laughed a lot the next morning. Poor girl. Okay, cool. Thank you very much for that dummy moment. I'm sure Rob and I have more to share as well at the start, but we are here to talk about anxiety and how to live with anxiety and cope whilst also loving Jesus and living as a Christian. So would you tell us how long you have been a Christian for, and how would you describe your relationship with Jesus?
Yeah, so this makes me sound very old, although I am in my early 40s, so I guess I am. I became a Christian about 20 years ago when I was a student. So that felt quite late on in life comparatively with other people who'd grown up in Christian families. But now I look back and think it was really, really young. And I think I would describe my relationship with Jesus as he is that person in my life that never, ever lets me down. He's like the solid, faithful relationship. And I often talk about people who are on your 2 a.m. list that you can just call up and be like, "Hey, something's gone terribly wrong." And He's my 2 a.m. list. He's my 2 p.m. list. He is just there all the time for me. And what is beautiful about my relationship with Jesus is no matter how bad, this sounds awful, but no matter how badly I treat him, he just turns up for me and turns up for me and turns up for me and carries on loving me in an unconditional way that nobody else does, because we're all so sinful. And that's what's so beautiful about my relationship with him.
Wow, absolutely. Gosh, that made me feel really emotional. So you've been a Christian then, yeah, you said since kind of your early 20s.
Yeah.
How long have you struggled with anxiety? And that might be in different forms, because I know it, it can take different shapes over your life.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a funny one, really, because I think in today's society, we absolutely can identify it quickly, and we perhaps might even over-label it. But I think as a kid of the 90s, it wasn't a thing. And I remember as an adult having my first anxiety attack, which for me is slightly different to a panic attack. And then I suddenly realized I'd been having them since my earliest memory is like 7 years old, sitting in a primary school and being like, oh my goodness, everything's overwhelming and I can't cope. And I think at the time, I just thought, I don't know what I thought it was, but I certainly didn't have a label for it, and I didn't have an explanation for it. And nobody around me had that language either. So I think I've always just been labelled as a worrier and an over planner. And I think as a kid of the 90s, that's what you were labelled with. You weren't labelled with any sort of medical issue that could be treated. So there was perhaps a bit more rolling of the eyes and impatience. And then in 2016, when I had my daughter, it became crippling. And it became very apparent that it was unmanageable when the smallest thing would blow up. And I thought that a ridiculous consequence would happen from something that was very, very tiny. So there was a point where I needed to take back something at the supermarket and I didn't have a receipt. And I rang my husband and said, I'm going to have to take this back. And I don't have a receipt. And he was like, okay, just walk into the supermarket and tell them, hey, this is a little outfit from Tesco. I don't have the receipt. And in my head, I was going to get arrested and I was going to go to prison and I was going to be separated from my baby because I didn't have a receipt, and they would have thought that I had stolen it. And I had all of these feelings and this high heart rate, and it just became every single element. I couldn't leave the house until everything was perfect, because if I didn't leave the house perfect, then something terrible would happen, and then my husband would have to do the laundry or clear the side of washing, and I didn't want him to have to deal with that because I was in a hospital or in a morgue somewhere. So I had to make everything perfect. And if I made things perfect, then if I left the house, it would be okay. And I think that became obviously not sustainable as a way of life. But at that point in 2016, people were beginning to use the language of anxiety. And then I was able to get some help with that.
As a side question, did people in your life know that those thoughts were going? Obviously, your husband Dan knew, but did other people know that those thoughts were going on in your head?
No, I think it's actually a really dangerous place for a first-time mum to be, especially because I had gone through fertility treatment to have my daughter. That people just thought I was a worrier and an over planner, like I'd always been, and I don't think that they really realised, and every young mum worries when they go into the nursery that, oh, okay, I hope they're okay. But I literally wouldn't go in unless I had my mobile phone in my hand ready to call 999. It got to that point that I just was convinced every moment something was going to happen that was terrible. And I probably didn't share very much because I had some dismissive experienced mums around me kind of saying, oh, it's just because you're a young mum. Oh, it's because you've not done it before. And I don't think they had realised my history of that. And I don't think I'd probably realised my history of that either until it got to that critical point.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously when you were younger, maybe that you were saying it wasn't really recognized as a thing. So maybe there wasn't any sort of like treatment. But now and in the past kind of 10 years, what sorts of things have you done or would you kind of recommend, I suppose, as things that help you cope with anxiety? So that might be on the kind of medication end, which we're very happy to talk about, or maybe on a spiritual side or a social side. What kind of things help you to cope?
I think there's several things really. So I think the first thing is your physical health. So I know that fatigue is a problem because we all know that we get over emotional and can't make rational decisions when we're tired, which is partly, I guess, why it really became a critical point when I was a young mum with a newborn. I make sure that I exercise a lot and I make sure that I try and get a decent amount of sleep just so that I know that I'm looking after my body. I hate medication. I'm the sort of person that won't take paracetamol if I've got a headache because I don't like putting chemicals in my body. And now I've just got used to the fact that that's something that I may have to take now and again, and getting over that stigma and not being ashamed to just say, hey, I need some help. But I also have invested quite heavily in therapy. So I've seen Christian counsellors, I've seen counsellors that focus on post-traumatic stress, because I guess without going into it too much in this 20 minutes, I can pinpoint an exact moment in my life that has made me anxious and is the foundation of all of this. And so they've worked with me to kind of unpick that. Just because one trauma happened doesn't mean it's going to be repeated in my life. So there's several different stages and several different steps that I work with to kind of help me cope.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful. And I think it's important. I think we said this on Dan's podcast as well, but like if medication is a thing that you're afraid of because of kind of a stigma or that feeling of not wanting to put chemicals in your body, but actually maybe it will be something that will be helpful and it's kind of worth chatting about maybe with a GP or a parent or a wise friend or whatever, just to not completely rule it out, because actually it can be quite helpful.
Yeah. And I think to say on that, sorry, Izzie, but I think to say on that, like, to be consistent in your thinking. So I was more than happy to really think through and pray about the implications of having fertility treatment, but I took it because that was something that was important to me. If I had a broken wrist because I'd fallen over, I wouldn't just kind of go, oh, I'm just going to think that. Well, I would take medical intervention, and I don't know why I was so against it. But then when I thought about it logically and had those conversations with people, if I've got repetitive strain injury in my wrist, I'm going to bound it. I'm going to support it. I'm going to take painkillers. I'm going to regularly have to revisit that medical treatment. And there's nothing wrong with taking medication because your brain is not quite firing in a healthy way. Sometimes you just need that reset and you can't do it by yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we do live in a society now where it's much more acceptable and reasonable to take medication for these sorts of things. So actually it can be much easier to ask for help now, can't it?
Definitely.
So I kind of like teed up this question for you a little bit. The question is, how do you put your mental health and your faith together, kind of talking about how to trust Jesus when you're feeling anxious? But I also mentioned to you that one of the things I admire so much about you is just how you do that. You hold your mental health difficulties and your faith so beautifully together. And I've never seen you kind of like say, oh, Jesus has just taken away all my anxiety, or,
I wish.
when I'm worshipping Jesus, I just don't feel anxious and I'm choosing joy over everything else. Like, you're not quite wired that way. I mean, if you are, that's fine. That's for you.
I would love that, but it's not me.
Exactly. But for you, I've seen you live beautifully with both and not reject one for the other and not use one as an excuse. So could you kind of talk about how you put those two things together?
Yeah, I think some of my therapy made me realise that I am a very competent woman and I have got many great achievements in my life without sounding arrogant, but there are lots of things that I can do well, but I can't do everything. And one of those things is I can't control lots of elements of my life, and yet Jesus can. Like, our God is a God who created the universe and breathed life into us just by blowing into us. Like, that's like, life. And I don't have that power. So who am I to try and hold that so closely and be like, well, I can do better than you, God. And I kind of picture myself in that. We call God our Father, And yet I want to be in charge. And I now view myself as this toddler just going, okay, I'll hold your hand. And I really don't want to have this. And I really don't want to go down the path that you have carved out for me. But I am utterly convinced that his plan for me is perfect and his timing is perfect. And, you know, we read in the Bible, like we have people praying saying, do you know, there's a thorn in my side, please take it away. And he doesn't. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, we learn from that and we learn to rely on him. And I think, you know, that bit in Daniel where they say, and even if not, God is still good. Like, they're going to be burnt in a fire. And that's
my favorite verse in the whole Bible.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I had that on my phone screensaver for a long time, because I think people would say, I'll be fine. Why are you worrying? And I'm like, well, no, it won't be fine because I might die, or they might die, or I might have some horrible illness, because Christians aren't immune from that. But if that happens, God is still good. His timing is still good. His plan is still perfect. And I have to just be a toddler and take his hand and go, okay, I trust you. Like, ultimately, I say a lot, it's above my pay grade. His plan is above my pay grade. I just have to trust him, do you know? We have above our bed the Isaiah 43 verse 2, you know, where it says, like, I'm going to go through those waters and I'm not going to drown, and I'm going to go through that fire and I'm not going to be burned, because he protects us. And if we genuinely, truly believe that the God of the Bible created the universe and loves us how he describes how he loves us, who am I to be stamping my toddler feet saying, no, I want it my way and I want to control it? And we've all seen those toddlers trying to tie their laces, and we just want to go, can I just step in and help you? This would be so much easier. And they're going, no, I want to do it by myself. And I view me trying to control my anxiety and control my mental health as being a toddler trying to really badly tie my shoes. And he's going, let me just help you. Just sit with me. And I know you're frustrated and I know you're having a tantrum, but let me just hold you. And that's how I've come to manage it, really.
Wow. And I think you, like, it doesn't mean that you don't have those moments, but it's kind of how you consolidate that. Like, actually, yeah, do you know what? I just had a really stupid tantrum like a toddler, and now I'm going to sit down and talk to you again, God, and not leave, you know, some massive space between us because I feel embarrassed or ashamed. Like, he's kind of expecting us to do that, isn't he? Because he's a father and he knows us really well. So, yeah, absolutely.
And no loving father or parent watches their kid have a tantrum over trying to be independent and then just sits there with crossed arms and goes, well, told you so, I could do it better. They go, okay, let me love you now. I'll give you a cuddle, we'll calm down, and then, you know, I'll try and help you. And he is the perfect parent. And that's the image that I always keep in my head. Yeah.
Okay, so final question. I mean, I could ask you a million more questions, and we've literally spent 7 years talking about these things. But my question was, is there any advice you would give to a teenager experiencing anxiety and wanting to live out their faith? But maybe I could make it even more poignant. Is there any advice you would give to your 10-year-old if she was struggling with anxiety, but really wanting to love Jesus and live out her faith and witness for him?
Yeah, I think my main advice is you got to be honest. Like, I spent a lot of years, and I really remember being 7 years old in primary school, just being like, just breathe through it and pretend nothing's happening and you'll be fine. Just carry on with this maths problem and you'll be fine. And I didn't tell anybody. And I didn't tell anybody that I ever felt like this until I rang my husband crying, going, I'm going to go to prison because I don't have a receipt. And I dealt with that myself for so long, thinking that I was just a worrier. And it was only when I started talking about it that I was like, oh, I can't change this by myself. And there is no shame. And I think the stigma of that has gone now. And I used to think, and I used to say out loud, oh, my stupid brain, and my brain's not working properly. And, you know, if only this and if only that. I have never fallen over and damaged a part of my body and gone, my stupid feet or my stupid bone for breaking. I've never done that, but I have done that about my brain. And it's just another organ that will sometimes fail because we're living in a fallen world. So be honest about it and seek help. And please don't be ashamed about it. Please don't be embarrassed about it, because I think we place so much emphasis on being successful, and our success is how we use our brain to make wise decisions or good choices. And then when our brain is not able to do that, we think it's our fault. And it's not. You know, we would never be like, ugh, your lungs don't work properly. I can't believe you've got to take an inhaler. And yet we say that to ourselves. We're so unkind to ourselves. So yeah, I would say don't think of it as a weakness. Our bodies in a fallen world can be rubbish. We don't always like how our bodies respond, but seek help, be honest. And it's really hard to be vulnerable. That first conversation of saying, I think I'm not okay, is going to be the most difficult conversation. And it will be a shock to some people that you are feeling like that. But it is really important to have that first conversation, because then it will get easier and easier after that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us, Jamie, and for sharing your wisdom.
You are very, very welcome.
Thank you, Jamie. That interview was really, really good, really open, really honest. And I'm just grateful I got to listen to it as well. So thanks very much. Izzie, do you have any initial thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously know Jamie, and I did the interview with her, and I was not surprised by anything she said, because I've watched her live that out for the last kind of 7 or 8 years that I've known her. But yeah, I just think it's so powerful, that thought of God as our loving parent, not just as a God who's kind of in control of stuff and we don't get a say or anything like that, but actually when we're feeling out of control, when we're feeling like we want to grasp things back into our control, that actually he's the parent and he's not going to do things that, you know, are bad for us, but also we can trust him to know the right way, even if we think we know better.
Yeah, absolutely. And that verse in Daniel where it says that God is still good, even though it might not end up well. I mean, obviously, I know the verse, but it's just in that context, it was good for her to bring that to light. And your favourite verse in the whole Bible?
Yeah, even if he does not, we will still worship God, or whatever the end of it is. But I know that even if he does not is the part of the verse. If I ever was going to get a verse tattooed on me, that would be the one.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I did like the parent-toddler analogy. I was in my head going, sometimes I am a little impatient with my toddler, but tying his shoes or whatever he does. But yeah, and that is true. Like all we want really is the best for them possible. And the picture of just being a toddler holding God's hand saying, yes, God, like take me where you want to take me, and something. It was just really powerful, really helpful. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, one thing that Jamie really inspires me with, which we didn't really go into too much, is she doesn't let her anxiety hold her back. And I don't mean that, you know, she's like constantly pushing us out of her comfort zone, or that she's, you know, some sort of superhuman, or that her anxiety isn't real, because it really is. And you heard about it in those in that interview. But I think her and her husband, Dan, who we had on the podcast before, they run a really small missional church in a council estate in Leicester. And Jamie is essentially the person who reaches out to the women in that place. There are a few women in their church, and Jamie is one of the people who is, you know, constantly welcoming new women in. If they do an event like a carol concert or something, she's the one talking to women, she's texting them, she's getting to know them, and they might not be her natural people that she would always go to, especially at the start before she knows them, but she really pushes herself to not let her anxiety hold back how she shares the gospel. And I think that's really important, that we might have different thorns in our side, as she said, but actually we are still called to be a witness, and that might look different from your extroverted, confident friend, but we can still do that, and we can ask God for help to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember there was a time on my year out when I was, actually no, it wasn't my year out, it was the year after. I had this plan to try and volunteer and help, but it wasn't quite working out. And I got the really early bus into town to go to this. It wasn't quite a job interview, but it was like information about a job. And I just felt so anxious in that moment on this bus, on this way to this thing where I wasn't even really sure what I was going to. And I just had this moment where I just started crying on the bus. And the anxiety that I felt in that moment was just like too much. I called my mum in the end. 19 years old, I think I was. A man crying on the bus. I just called my mum early in the morning and had a chat. And the reason I tell that story is just so we go through anxiety at different points in our life, whether it's not very often or whether it is very often. And I think her advice at the end was being open, honest, and talking about it, wasn't it? I think so. Yeah, I mean, it was the start of a little bit of a journey for me.
Yeah, and you might find that actually your anxiety is a bit like that with Rob, where it's kind of just out of the blue, just, you know, one day, and you don't know why you feel upset and anxious, and you just need to chat to someone in that moment. Or you might find it's more like Jamie's, where it's kind of like underlying for a long time and it's really stopping you from living life and putting kind of horrible thoughts in your head, and maybe you need a bit more help, like therapy or a doctor or someone professional. But either way, those two situations lead to us talking to somebody and being open and honest and asking for help. And that is what Jamie would say is the first step, didn't she?
Yeah, that's it. Great. Well, thanks again, Jamie. It was really good. What are we looking at next week, Izzie?
Well, now I am very sure that next week we are going to talk about alcohol and how we can kind of treat, I don't know, that kind of subject in our lives as Christians. It'd be different for all of us, and we obviously can't go into everything, but we had a really good chat about it and the role that alcohol has played in our lives and in our faith and things like that. So yeah, come back next week to hear about our thoughts on that.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Izzie. Thanks, Jamie. Bye, everyone.
Bye.